I texted my daughter-in-law asking where we'd spend Christmas. She replied, "Oops, we forgot to tell you. We went to Spain. Just me, your son, and your husband. Only the ones who really matter, you know?" 2 days later, she got a bank notification. Every account had been canceled, and the woman she thought was just a lonely old lady had vanished completely. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from that moment when my world crumbled with a single text message. It was December 27th, and I was sitting in my kitchen with my morning coffee, wondering why nobody had called on Christmas Day. The house felt unusually quiet, even for me. I'd spent the holiday alone, assuming there had been some miscommunication about plans. My son David had been vague when I'd asked about Christmas a few weeks earlier, just saying they were still figuring things out. So I decided to reach out to Rachel, my daughter-in-law. We'd never been particularly close.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
But after 22 years of marriage to my son, she was family. I kept my text simple and friendly. "Hi, Rachel. Hope you all had a wonderful Christmas. Just wondering about our plans for New Year's. Should I prepare anything?" The response came within minutes, and each word felt like a physical blow. "Oops, we forgot to tell you. We went to Spain. Just me, your son, and your husband. Only the ones who really matter, you know?" I stared at my phone screen, reading the message over and over. My husband of 43 years, Thomas, had gone to Spain for Christmas without telling me, with my son David and Rachel, the three of them, the ones who really matter. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. I set it down on the kitchen table and pressed my palms flat against the wood, trying to steady myself. This couldn't be real. Thomas wouldn't do this to me. We'd been planning a quiet Christmas at home, or so I thought. But as the shock began to wear off, memories started flooding back. Thomas saying he had business meetings the week of Christmas. David's evasive answers when I asked about holiday plans. Rachel's satisfied smirk at Thanksgiving dinner when she mentioned how some families know how to prioritize what's important. I walked to Thomas's study, my legs feeling unsteady. His desk was cleared of the usual clutter. The calendar on the wall showed nothing marked for the Christmas week. But now I noticed faint eraser marks where something had been written and removed. In the trash can, I found crumpled boarding pass receipts. Madrid. 3 passengers. The reality hit me like ice water. They had planned this trip for weeks, maybe months. They had deliberately excluded me. Worse than that, they had lied to me, letting me spend Christmas alone while they were living it up in Europe. I sank into Thomas's leather chair, the one I'd bought him for his 60th birthday. Everything in this room spoke of our life together. The books we'd discussed, the photos of our travels, the awards from his accounting firm where I'd worked beside him for 30 years before retiring. Had it all meant nothing to him? My phone buzzed with another text from Rachel. "Don't be dramatic about it, Margaret. We needed family time. You understand, right? Family time. Without me. I wasn't family anymore, apparently. The cruelest part was how casually they'd done it. No argument, no confrontation, no explanation. They'd simply erased me from their Christmas, from their family, from their lives. As if I were so insignificant that my absence wouldn't even be noticed by anyone who mattered. I thought about my sister Janet in Oregon, who'd called on Christmas Day. "Where's Thomas?" she'd asked. "Oh, he's resting," I'd lied, not wanting to admit I didn't know where my own husband was. Now I understood why he hadn't come to the phone. For hours I sat in that chair, feeling smaller and smaller. I was 67 years old, married for 43 years, mother to 1 son, and apparently I had become so invisible that my own family could take a Christmas vacation without me and consider it perfectly reasonable. But then something else began to creep in alongside the hurt, something that felt dangerous and unfamiliar. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns out quickly. This was cold and steady, growing stronger with each breath, because as I sat there in Thomas's study, surrounded by the evidence of our shared life, I began to think about other things, important things, Like whose name was on the mortgage of this house, whose retirement account had funded their comfortable lifestyle, whose inheritance from my parents had paid for David's college, his wedding, the down payment on his first house, whose careful financial planning had allowed Thomas to retire early and enjoy these golden years. Mine, all mine. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found my financial advisor's number. It was after hours, but I left a message. Harold, this is Margaret Thompson. I need to meet with you first thing tomorrow morning. It's urgent. Then I called my bank's 24-hour customer service line, First National Bank. How can I help you? I need to discuss my accounts, I said, my voice steadier than it had been all day. All of them. As I spoke to the representative, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Control. For the first time since reading that devastating text message, I wasn't just reacting to what had been done to me. I was planning what I would do about it. They thought I was just a lonely old lady who didn't matter. They were about to learn exactly how wrong they were. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in months, I allowed myself to really think about the changes I'd been ignoring. The signs had been there all along, hadn't they? I'd just been too trusting, too willing to believe the best of the people I loved. It started coming back to me in pieces. Like a puzzle I'd been too blind to assemble. 3 months ago, Thomas had begun working late more often, just catching up on some client files, he'd said when I questioned the sudden change in routine. But Thomas had been semi-retired for 2 years. What clients? When I'd asked to see him off at his office one morning, he'd gotten flustered. No need, Margaret, you'd just be bored. He'd never minded my company before. Then there was Thanksgiving. We'd hosted David and Rachel, as we had for the past 15 years. But this time felt different. They'd arrived late, claiming traffic, though David's car wasn't particularly dirty for a long drive. Rachel had been unusually animated, almost giddy, talking about all the exciting changes coming up. When I'd asked what she meant, she'd just smiled and said, "Oh, you'll see." I remembered how they'd huddled together in the living room after dinner while I cleaned up. Usually, David would help me with the dishes. It was our tradition, our time to catch up. But when I'd called him into the kitchen, Rachel had said, "Let him relax, Margaret. He's had such a stressful week." Since when did Rachel speak for my son? The conversation had stopped abruptly when I'd walked into the living room with coffee. Thomas had been leaning forward, speaking in low tones, but he'd sat back quickly when he saw me. "Just talking about the weather," he'd said, but it was November. Who gets excited about weather? Now I understood. They'd been planning the Spain trip, discussing logistics, probably laughing about how easy it would be to fool me. But the signs went back even further than Thanksgiving. In September, Rachel had started making comments about my age. Little things, supposedly harmless. "Margaret, you seem tired lately. Are you feeling all right?" When I was feeling perfectly fine. "Maybe you should consider one of those medical alert systems. You never know at your age." I was 67, not 90. She'd also begun suggesting I might be confused about things. When I'd mentioned that David had promised to help me organize the garage, Rachel had laughed. "Oh, Margaret, that was last year. Don't you remember? We already did that." But we hadn't. The garage was still a mess. Thomas had started backing her up on these little corrections. "You're getting forgetful, dear," he'd say gently when I'd insist I was right about something. It was so subtle, so consistent, that I'd begun to doubt myself. Had I really forgotten that conversation with David? Was I becoming confused? The most painful memory was from October. I'd been planning our 40th wedding anniversary celebration for January. Nothing elaborate, just dinner with David and Rachel at our favorite restaurant. I'd mentioned it to Rachel, excited to share the planning. Her response had been a pitying smile. "Oh, Margaret, Tom and I already talked about this. He thinks a quiet evening at home would be better for you. All that excitement might be too much." Tom. She'd called him Tom, something she'd never done before. And when had my husband discussed our anniversary plans with Rachel instead of me? I'd felt hurt then, but I'd pushed it down. Maybe Thomas really had mentioned it to her. Maybe I was being oversensitive. Marriage required compromise, didn't it? But now, lying in my empty bed while my husband was presumably sleeping in some Spanish hotel, I saw it clearly. They'd been gaslighting me for months, making me question my memory, my perceptions, my worth. They'd been preparing me to be left behind. The morning after Thanksgiving, I'd found Thomas and David in the study with papers spread across the desk. They'd quickly gathered them up when I'd brought them coffee. "Just boring financial stuff," Thomas had said. "Nothing you need to worry about." Nothing I needed to worry about, in a marriage where I'd handled most of our financial planning for decades. I'd been excluded from conversations, decisions, planning. They'd made me feel like an intruder in my own life, and I'd let them do it because I loved them, because I trusted them. The week before Christmas, when Thomas claimed he had those mysterious business meetings, I'd offered to iron his shirts. "No need," he'd said quickly. "I'll take them to the dry cleaner." Thomas hated the expense of dry cleaning. He always said my ironing was better than any professional service. David had been just as secretive. His usual weekly phone calls had become brief and awkward. When I'd asked about his work, his answers were vague. When I'd mentioned Christmas plans, he'd changed the subject. I'd attributed it to holiday stress, but now I knew better. He'd been lying to me, just like his father. The cruelest part was how normal they'd acted. Thomas had kissed me goodbye that morning in December like any other day. "See you tonight, dear," he'd said. But he hadn't come home that night, or the next, and I'd believed his texts about extended meetings, about staying in a hotel near the office. I'd even worried about him, texted him to be careful driving in the winter weather. He'd been in Spain, with my son and daughter-in-law, planning excursions, sharing meals, creating memories. A family vacation without me. I got up and walked to the window, looking out at our snow-covered yard. Thomas and I had planted those trees together 30 years ago. We'd built the deck where we'd had countless barbecues with David's friends. We'd painted this house room by room, chosen every fixture together. Or had we? Now I wasn't sure what was real anymore. I thought about Rachel's text again. Only the ones who really matter. She'd been establishing a hierarchy, and I wasn't in it. My husband of 43 years, my only child, my daughter-in-law, they'd formed their own family unit, and I was expendable. But here's what they didn't realize. Here's what their months of manipulation and lies had overlooked. Everything they'd enjoyed, that trip to Spain, their comfortable lifestyle, their financial security, it all traced back to me. My inheritance, my decades of careful saving, my financial contributions that had allowed Thomas to retire early and David to buy his house. They thought they could push me aside because I was just a wife, just a mother. They thought my role was to quietly fade into the background while they lived their lives. They had no idea who they were really dealing with. The next morning, I sat across from Harold Brennan in his downtown office, watching his expression change as I laid out the documents I'd gathered. Harold had been our financial advisor for 12 years, and I'd never seen him look this uncomfortable. "Margaret, I need to be completely honest with you," he said, adjusting his glasses nervously. "Thomas came to see me 3 weeks ago. He asked about transferring some assets, restructuring certain accounts." My stomach dropped. "What kind of restructuring?" Harold pulled out a thick file. "He wanted to know about putting David on several of your joint accounts. He said you were experiencing some memory issues and that it would be prudent to have backup access." Memory issues. There it was again. That careful campaign to paint me as incompetent. "Harold," I said slowly, "I want you to pull up every account we have, every investment, every certificate of deposit, every savings account. I want to see exactly what's in my name, what's in Thomas's name, and what's joint." For the next hour, Harold walked me through our financial portfolio. What I discovered made me physically ill. Of our $1, $2 million in assets, nearly 70% was in my name alone. My parents had left me a substantial inheritance when they passed away 15 years ago. I'd been careful with that money, investing it wisely, watching it grow. What I'd forgotten, in all my years of thinking of Thomas and me as a team, was that I'd kept most of those assets separate for tax purposes. The house was in my name. I'd inherited it from my parents, and we'd never changed the deed because our lawyer had advised it would be more tax efficient to keep it that way. Thomas had always joked that he was living in my house, but I'd never thought of it as anything other than ours. My retirement account, built up over 30 years of working, was obviously mine alone, but even our joint savings account was primarily funded by my contributions. Thomas's accounting firm had done well, but he'd been generous with his spending over the years. Golf club memberships, expensive dinners, spontaneous weekend trips. I'd been the one quietly replenishing our savings. "Harold," I said, my voice steady despite the churning in my stomach. "If Thomas tried to access any of these accounts without me, would he be able to?" Harold shifted uncomfortably. "The joint accounts, yes. But Margaret, about 70% of your wealth is in accounts where you're the sole owner. He'd need your signature or power of attorney to touch those." Power of attorney. Is that what those papers in the study had been about? Had Thomas been planning to have me declared incompetent? "I want to make some changes," I told Harold. "Starting today." I spent the rest of the morning restructuring everything. I moved all funds from our joint accounts into new accounts in my name only. I changed beneficiaries on my retirement accounts and life insurance policies. I updated passwords on every online account. Harold looked increasingly troubled as we worked. "Margaret, are you sure about this? These are major changes. Maybe you should discuss them with Thomas first." "Thomas is in Spain," I said simply. "He didn't discuss that with me." By noon, Thomas had access to exactly one account, his own small checking account with about $3,000. Everything else was now protected, but I wasn't done. My next stop was the bank where we'd had our mortgage for 20 years. The house was paid off now, but I wanted to understand all the implications of sole ownership. "Mrs. Thompson," the mortgage officer said, pulling up our records, "I remember when you and your husband paid off the loan early. That was smart financial planning." "Actually," I said, reviewing the records, "I see that the final payments came from my account specifically." She nodded. "Yes, you made that large payment from your inheritance funds. Saved you thousands in interest. My inheritance funds, my decision, my money that had freed us from a mortgage payment and allowed Thomas to retire comfortably." From the bank, I drove to David's neighborhood. I'd been thinking about something that had bothered me for months. Last spring, David and Rachel had bought a new car, an expensive SUV that they'd been excited to show off. When I'd asked how they'd managed such a purchase on David's teacher salary, they'd been vague. Now I sat in my car outside their house, looking at that SUV in the driveway, and I pulled out my phone to check something I'd forgotten about. 6 months ago, Thomas had asked me to sign some papers. "Just updating our will," he'd said. Nothing major. But there had been other papers mixed in. I'd signed them without reading carefully because I trusted my husband. I called Harold back. "Harold, I need you to check something for me. 6 months ago, did we make any loans or gifts to family members?" There was a pause. "Let me look." "Yes, Margaret. There was a $20,000 transfer to David Thompson. It was categorized as a family gift." $20,000. Enough for a down payment on that SUV. Money that had come from my accounts, with my signature, but I'd had no idea what I was really signing. "Harold, I need copies of every document I signed that day, and I want to see exactly where that money came from." The money had come from my investment account. My money, gifted to my son, without my knowledge or real consent. I sat in my car outside David's house, staring at the SUV I'd unknowingly purchased for them, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about being excluded from a Christmas trip. This was about years of financial manipulation. They'd been using my money while systematically pushing me out of their lives. But here's what really made my blood boil. I remembered now that David had called me the week after they bought that car. He'd thanked me for being so understanding about money being tight. He'd asked if I could help with their electric bill that month. I'd sent him $500, worried that my son was struggling financially, all while he was driving around in a car I'd unknowingly bought for him. My phone rang. Thomas's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for a long moment, then declined the call. Immediately he called back. I declined again. The third time I answered. "Margaret, thank God. I've been trying to reach you. There seems to be some problem with our accounts. The hotel can't process our credit card, and when I called the bank—" "How's Spain, Thomas?" Silence. "Margaret, I can explain. I'm sure you can. But I'm not interested in explanations right now." "Now look, you're being dramatic. It was just a small trip. Rachel thought it would be good for David to have some time with his father, and you've been so tired lately." "Tired. Right. Just like I've been forgetful and confused and difficult." Another pause. "Margaret, what have you done?" I've taken control of my own finances, something I should have done a long time ago. You can't just cut off access to our money, my money, Thomas. Most of it has always been my money. I could hear Rachel's voice in the background, sharp and angry, though I couldn't make out the words. Margaret, we need to discuss this when I get home. Don't do anything else until we can talk. When will that be? You forgot to mention your travel dates. We'll be back tomorrow. Margaret, please. Whatever you think happened, we can work it out. What I think happened? Thomas, you took a family vacation without me. You lied to me for weeks. You've been letting Rachel convince everyone that I'm losing my mind so you could what exactly? Take over my finances? Have me declared incompetent? That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Explain to me how a man spends Christmas in Spain with his son and daughter-in-law, but leaves his wife at home thinking he's working. I could hear Rachel more clearly now. She was saying something about dramatic old women and ungrateful. Put Rachel on the phone, I said. Margaret, that's not necessary. Put her on the phone, Thomas. There was a pause, some muffled conversation. Then Rachel's voice, dripping with fake sweetness. Hi, Margaret. I hope you're not upset about our little trip. It was really last minute, and we thought you might prefer staying home. Rachel, I want you to listen to me very carefully. You have 48 hours to return the $20,000 that was transferred to David's account 6 months ago. Silence. I don't know what you're talking about. The money for your car, the money my husband had me sign for without telling me what it was for. That was a gift. You can't take back a gift. Watch me. More silence. Margaret, you're being unreasonable. That money is gone. We used it for expenses. Then you'd better figure out how to replace it. Because as of today, the bank account that funded your little Spanish vacation is closed. The credit cards you've been using are canceled. And if you want any financial support from this family going forward, you'll need to start treating me like I actually belong in it. I could hear her saying something to Thomas, her voice rising. Thomas came back on the line. Margaret, you're making a huge mistake. We're a family. We work these things out together. You're right, Thomas. Families do work things out together. They don't lie to each other. They don't steal from each other. And they sure as hell don't abandon each other on Christmas. I hung up. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The next 24 hours were the most empowering of my life. For decades, I'd been the supportive wife, the understanding mother, the one who quietly made things work behind the scenes. Now, for the first time, I was acting entirely for myself. I started by changing every password on every account they'd ever had access to. Online banking, credit cards, investment portfolios, even the streaming services they used at their house. It felt petty, but it also felt necessary. They needed to understand that nothing in our lives would be assumed anymore. Then I called my lawyer, Patricia Williams. We'd used her for estate planning years ago, and I trusted her discretion. Margaret, I'm glad you called, Patricia said when I explained the situation. What you're describing sounds like financial elder abuse, even if it's coming from family members. Is that what this is? Systematic manipulation to access your finances while undermining your confidence and autonomy? Yes, that's exactly what it is. The good news is that since most of the assets are in your name, you have significant control here. Patricia walked me through the legal implications of what I was doing. Everything I'd done so far was completely within my rights. The joint accounts had been mine to close. The credit cards had been mine to cancel. Even the $20,000 given to David could potentially be recovered as an undisclosed gift obtained through deception. What about the house? I asked. It's yours, period. If Thomas has been living there as your husband, he has some rights, but they're limited. You could ask him to leave if you wanted to. I hadn't considered that possibility, but now it lingered in my mind. Patricia, I need to understand something. If Thomas tried to have me declared incompetent, what would that process look like? Her voice became serious. It would require medical evaluations, court hearings, substantial evidence of cognitive decline. Has anyone suggested you're having memory issues? I told her about the months of subtle suggestions, the gentle corrections, the implications that I was becoming confused or forgetful. Margaret, that's a common tactic. If you gaslight someone long enough, you can make them doubt their own competence. It also creates a narrative that can be useful later if you want to challenge their legal capacity. The pieces were falling into place. They hadn't just excluded me from Christmas. They'd been building a case against my mental competence, possibly for months. I want you to arrange for an independent cognitive evaluation, I told Patricia. I want medical documentation that I'm completely competent to make my own decisions. Smart thinking. I'll set that up today. After I hung up with Patricia, I drove to the bank one more time. I needed to understand exactly what Thomas and David would face when they tried to access funds that were no longer available. The banker explained that the canceled credit cards would be declined for any new charges. The closed joint accounts would trigger notifications to both account holders. Thomas would still be able to access his small personal checking account, but that wouldn't last long in Spain. What about automatic payments? I asked. Any automatic payments from the closed accounts will be declined. You'll need to review what you want to continue and set up new payment methods. I thought about this. Our house insurance, utilities, car payments, all the practical expenses of our life together. I could let them all lapse, force Thomas to deal with the chaos when he returned. But that would hurt me too. Instead, I did something more strategic. I set up new automatic payments for everything essential, but only from my personal accounts. The house would stay insured and heated, but it would be clearly my house, maintained with my money. Then I thought about David and Rachel's situation. If they'd been relying on occasional gifts from us, from me, to supplement their lifestyle, they were about to face some difficult realities. I called their mortgage company. I'd like to understand the payment history on a property, I said, giving them David's address. I'm sorry, but I can only provide that information to the account holder. What if I told you I was considering helping with payments? Would you be able to tell me if the account is current? There was a pause. I can tell you that the account you're asking about is currently 37 days past due. 37 days. They were behind on their mortgage and probably counting on Christmas money from us to catch up. I felt a moment of maternal concern, then remembered Rachel's text. Only the ones who really matter. My phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from Thomas. I'd been declining them, but now I listened to one of his voicemails. Margaret, this is ridiculous. You're stranding us in Spain. Rachel is crying. David doesn't understand what's happening. Just call me back so we can fix this. Rachel was crying. The woman who'd excluded me from Christmas and called me irrelevant was crying because her vacation had been disrupted. I called Harold again. Harold, I want to understand the tax implications of gifts to family members. If I gave David $20,000 without realizing it was a gift, can I count that against future inheritance limits? Absolutely. In fact, you can declare it as part of his lifetime gift allowance. If you wanted to be very strict about it, you could even demand its return if it was given under false pretenses. I made another decision. I called David's school district. Hi, this is Margaret Thompson, David Thompson's mother. I'm trying to reach him about a family matter. I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson, but David is on vacation this week. He won't be back until January 3rd. Of course, vacation. Thank you. So David had taken time off work for this Spain trip. This wasn't spontaneous or last minute. They'd planned this for weeks, coordinated time off, booked flights, arranged hotels. The level of deception was staggering. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister Janet in Oregon. Margaret, how was your Christmas? I was worried when Thomas didn't come to the phone the other day. I told her everything. The excluded vacation, the financial manipulation, the months of gaslighting. Janet listened without interrupting, her anger building with each detail. That son of a bitch, she said finally. And David, I can't believe David went along with this. I don't think I really know my son anymore, I admitted. What are you going to do? I'm not sure yet. But I'm done being the family doormat. Good. You know, Margaret, Mom always said you were too generous for your own good. She worried that people would take advantage of your kindness. Our mother had been gone for 15 years, but I could hear her voice in my memory. Trust, but verify, she used to say. I'd forgotten the second part of that advice. Late that night, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, making lists. What did I want from my life going forward? What was I willing to tolerate? What needed to change? For 43 years, I'd defined myself as Thomas's wife and David's mother. But who was Margaret Thompson when she wasn't taking care of everyone else? I thought about the trips Thomas and I had talked about taking but never did because David needed help with something. The hobbies I'd abandoned because family obligations came first. The friendships I'd let lapse because Thomas preferred staying home. I picked up my laptop and started browsing travel websites. I'd always wanted to see Italy. Thomas had never been interested, said European food disagreed with him, but there was nothing stopping me from going alone. Within an hour, I'd bookmarked a 2-week tour of Tuscany that departed in February. The cost would be significant, but it was my money. I deserved to spend it on something that made me happy. My phone rang again. Thomas. This time I answered. Margaret, thank God. We've been trying to reach you all day. I've been busy. Look, we need to talk about this situation. Rachel spoke to a lawyer here in Madrid, and he says what you're doing could be considered financial abuse. I laughed, actually laughed. Financial abuse? Thomas, let me explain something to you. You took my money, lied to me for months, excluded me from a family vacation, and had me sign documents without explaining what they were. That's financial abuse. You're being dramatic. No, I'm being accurate. And here's what's going to happen. You're going to figure out how to get home from Spain without my credit cards. When you get here, we're going to have a conversation about the future of this marriage. And David is going to return the $20,000 I unknowingly gave him. That's impossible. They don't have that kind of money. Then they shouldn't have spent mine. I could hear Rachel in the background again, her voice higher and more frantic than before. Put Rachel on, I said. Margaret, that's not necessary. Put her on the phone, Thomas, or I'll hang up and you won't reach me again until you're back in the country. After a moment, Rachel came on the line. Her voice was shaky now, none of the smugness from the previous day. Margaret, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We never meant to exclude you. The trip was just so last minute, and we thought you might not enjoy the travel. Rachel, stop lying. You planned this trip for weeks. David took vacation time from work. You booked hotels and flights. This was deliberately planned without me. That's not true. Rachel, I need you to understand something. For years, you've been treating me like an inconvenience in my own family. You've undermined my relationship with my son, convinced my husband that I'm becoming incompetent, and helped yourself to my money. That ends now. I don't know what you're talking about. The $20,000 for your car. The constant suggestions that I'm forgetful or confused. The way you speak for David when I try to talk to him. The way you've gradually taken over my role in family decisions. Silence. Here's what's going to happen, Rachel. When you get back from Spain, you and I are going to have a very honest conversation about your future relationship with this family. And that relationship is going to depend entirely on whether you can learn to treat me with basic respect. You can't threaten me. I'm not threatening you. I'm explaining reality, the money you've been spending, the comfortable lifestyle you've enjoyed, the financial support you've counted on. It all comes from me, and if you want it to continue, you'll need to earn it. I heard her say something to Thomas, her voice rising to near hysteria. Thomas came back on the line. Margaret, you're destroying this family. No, Thomas. You destroyed it when you chose to lie to me for months. When you chose Rachel's opinion over our marriage vows. When you chose to treat me like a burden instead of a partner. I never. You did. You all did. And now you're dealing with the consequences. What do you want from us? It was the first time he'd asked what I wanted instead of telling me what I should accept. I want honesty. I want respect. I want to be included in decisions that affect my life. And I want acknowledgement that you've all treated me terribly. And if we do that, then maybe we can rebuild something. But it won't be the same as before, Thomas. I won't be the same as before. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet house, feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades, peace. For the first time in my marriage, I wasn't worried about what Thomas needed, what David wanted, what would make everyone else happy. I was thinking about what I needed, what I wanted, what would make me happy. And what I wanted was a life where I mattered, where my voice was heard, where my contributions were acknowledged and respected. If my family couldn't give me that, then maybe it was time to find a new family, one that actually deserved me. They came back 2 days early, and not by choice. I was in my kitchen making breakfast when I heard Thomas's key in the front door, the sound of suitcases dropping in the hallway, hushed, urgent voices, then footsteps toward the kitchen. Thomas appeared in the doorway looking haggard. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, his expensive vacation clothes wrinkled. Behind him, David looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. Rachel pushed past them both, her face flushed with anger. "We need to talk," Thomas said, his voice carefully controlled. "Good morning to you too," I replied, not looking up from buttering my toast. "How was the rest of your trip? Margaret, don't play games. Do you have any idea what you've put us through?" I took a sip of my coffee and finally looked at them. 3 people who'd been living it up in Spain while I sat alone on Christmas, now standing in my kitchen like I owed them something. "Actually, no. Why don't you tell me?" Rachel stepped forward, her composure barely contained. "You left us stranded. We couldn't pay for anything. The hotel threatened to call the police when our cards were declined. We had to borrow money from other guests just to eat. How terrible for you," I said calmly. "This is cruel, Margaret," David said, finally speaking. "Whatever you think we did, this was vindictive." I set down my coffee cup and looked at my son. Really looked at him. When had he become this person? When had he learned to speak to his mother like I was the problem? "David, sit down. All of you, sit down." They remained standing, a united front against me. "Fine, stand if you prefer. But you're going to listen to what I have to say." I pulled out my phone and opened the photos I'd taken of the financial documents Harold had shown me. "Thomas, can you explain to me why you went to our financial advisor 3 weeks ago asking about transferring my assets?" His face went pale. "That was just prudent planning." "Prudent planning for what? For having me declared incompetent? For taking control of my money? That's not what that was about." "Then what was it about?" "Because Harold showed me the paperwork you were asking about. Power of attorney documents, asset transfers. What exactly were you planning?" Rachel crossed her arms. "Margaret, you're being paranoid. Tom was just trying to help organize things better." "Tom?" I looked at her. "Since when do you call my husband Tom?" "That's what he asked me to call him." I turned to Thomas. "Is that true?" He shifted uncomfortably. "It's not important. It's important to me." "When did you start asking my daughter-in-law to call you by a nickname you've never used with anyone else?" The silence stretched between us. "I want to know about the Spain trip," I continued. "How long had you been planning it?" "Margaret, David, I'm asking you directly. How long?" My son looked at his father, then at Rachel, then finally at me. "Since October." "October. So for 2 months, while I was planning our anniversary dinner, while I was asking about Christmas arrangements, while I was worrying that you all seemed distant, you were planning a family vacation without me. It wasn't like that." "What was it like, David? Explain it to me." Rachel stepped forward again. "It was supposed to be a father-son trip, a chance for Tom and David to reconnect." "And you went because?" "Because David wanted me there." I looked at my son. "Is that true, David? You wanted your wife on a father-son trip?" David's face flushed. "Mom, it's complicated." "No, it's really not. Either you wanted a trip with your father, or you wanted a trip without your mother. Which was it?" "You wouldn't have enjoyed it," Rachel said quickly. "All that travel, the different foods, the language barrier. We thought you'd be more comfortable at home." "Did you ask me?" "What?" "Did anyone ask me if I wanted to go to Spain for Christmas? Did anyone give me the option to decide for myself whether I'd enjoy it?" None of them answered. Of course not. Because this was never about what I'd enjoy. This was about what you all wanted, and I wasn't part of that. I stood up and walked to the counter where I'd laid out more documents. "Let's talk about money, since that seems to be what this is really about." I turned back to face them, holding the bank statements. "Thomas, of our $2 million in assets, how much do you think is actually yours?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, how much of our wealth came from your income versus mine?" He looked uncomfortable. "Margaret, we've always shared everything." "That's not what I asked." "David, did you know that the $20,000 you received for your car came entirely from my inheritance money?" David's face went white. "What are you talking about?" "The money your father had me sign for 6 months ago. I thought I was updating our will. Instead, I was gifting you $20,000 of my money you used to buy a car while asking me to help with your electric bill. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. Because none of you have ever bothered to understand where our family's money actually comes from. I spread the documents on the kitchen table. 70% of our assets are in my name alone. The house is mine. The investment accounts are primarily mine. Even our joint savings account was funded mostly by my contributions. Thomas stepped forward. Margaret, what are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that you've all been living off my money while treating me like I don't matter. You've been excluding me from decisions about our life while depending on my financial support. Rachel's voice rose. That's not fair. We never asked you for money. You didn't have to ask. It was just expected. David's down payment on his house, my money. Your car, my money. This Spain trip, paid for with credit cards that I fund. I pulled out another document. David, your mortgage is 37 days past due. Were you planning to ask me for help with that too? My son looked stricken. How do you know about that? Because I called your mortgage company. Because I wanted to understand what financial pressures might have motivated this family conspiracy. It's not a conspiracy, Rachel said, but her voice lacked conviction. What would you call it, Rachel? Lying to me for months about vacation plans, manipulating me into signing financial documents, systematically undermining my confidence while accessing my money? I sat back down, feeling suddenly tired. Here's what I think happened. I think you all realize that I control most of our family's wealth. I think that made you uncomfortable, maybe even resentful. I think you decided it would be easier to manage me than to respect me. Thomas sat down heavily. Margaret, that's not how it was. Then how was it, Thomas? Because from where I sit, it looks like you've been planning to sideline me financially while Rachel works on sidelining me emotionally. I never tried to sideline you, Rachel protested. Really? The constant suggestions that I'm forgetful? The way you speak for David when I try to talk to him? The way you've gradually taken over family planning and decision-making? I turned to my son. David, when's the last time you and I had a conversation without Rachel present? He thought about it, his face troubled. I don't remember. I do. It was 6 months ago, before Rachel started insisting that family discussions needed to include everyone. She was trying to be inclusive. She was trying to control the narrative. And it worked, didn't it? You barely talk to me anymore unless she's there to manage the conversation. The kitchen fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Thomas spoke. What do you want from us, Margaret? I want honesty. I want respect. And I want acknowledgement that you've all betrayed my trust. And then what? David asked quietly. Then we see if there's anything left to rebuild. Rachel had been quiet for several minutes, but now she exploded. This is ridiculous. You're acting like we committed some terrible crime. We took a vacation. We made some financial decisions. That's what families do. Families don't lie to each other for months, Rachel. We didn't lie. You told me you forgot to mention the trip. But David took vacation time from work. You booked hotels. You planned this for months. That's not forgetting. That's lying. Fine. We lied. Are you happy now? We lied because we knew you'd make it difficult. You'd want to change the plans, or add your own requirements, or find some way to make it about you. The mask was finally off. Make it about me? Rachel? It was supposed to be about family. I am family. You're David's mother. That doesn't mean you get to control everything we do. I never tried to control anything. I just wanted to be included. You wanted to be included in everything. Every decision, every plan, every conversation. It's suffocating. Thomas and David both looked alarmed by Rachel's outburst, but she kept going. Do you know what it's like being married to someone whose mother calls every day? Who expects to be consulted about every choice we make? Who acts like she's still the most important woman in David's life? Rachel, stop, David said quietly. No, someone needs to say this. Your mother has never accepted that you're married. She still acts like she comes first, like our marriage is secondary to your relationship with her. I felt like I'd been slapped. Is that what you think? It's what I know. Every time we make plans, you need to be included. Every time we have news, you expect to be the first to hear it. You still act like David is your little boy instead of my husband. I looked at my son. David, is that how you feel? He wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom, sometimes. Sometimes it does feel like you have trouble letting go. The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd discovered about their deception, they were making this about me being too involved in their lives. I see, I said quietly. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the yard where David had played as a child. The swing set was still there, though he'd outgrown it decades ago. I'd never taken it down because I loved the memories. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe I had been holding on too tightly to a relationship that had already changed. But that didn't excuse their behavior. It didn't justify the lies, the financial manipulation, the deliberate cruelty. I turned back to face them. You're right, Rachel. I have had trouble accepting that David is married. I've probably been too involved in your lives. Relief flickered across her face. But that doesn't excuse what you've done. You could have talked to me about boundaries. You could have asked for space. Instead, you chose deception and manipulation. The relief faded. So here's what's going to happen. You want space? You'll have it. You want independence? You'll get it. Completely. I walked back to the table and picked up the documents. David, you have 30 days to return the $20,000 I unknowingly gave you. If you can't manage that, we'll work out a payment plan, with interest. Mom. Thomas, you have 1 week to decide whether you want to be married to me or whether you'd prefer to be single. If you choose marriage, we'll need counseling. If you choose single, we'll need lawyers. Margaret, you can't be serious. And Rachel, I continued, not letting him finish, you'll have no financial support from this family until you learn to treat me with basic respect. No more gifts, no more emergency loans, no more credit cards that I pay for. Rachel's face was red with anger. You can't cut us off. We're family. Family treats each other with love and respect. What you've shown me is neither. I walked toward the kitchen door, then turned back. You all wanted to show me that I don't matter. Mission accomplished. Now you get to find out what your lives look like when I actually don't matter. I left them sitting in my kitchen and went upstairs to my bedroom. Through the window, I could see them loading back into David's car, their voices raised in argument. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something approaching peace. They were right about one thing. I had been holding on too tightly, trying to maintain relationships that had already shifted beyond recognition. But they were wrong about something too. Letting go didn't mean disappearing. It meant choosing myself for once. And that's exactly what I intended to do. 6 months later, I was sitting in a cafe in Florence, watching the sunrise paint the Duomo in shades of gold and pink, when my phone buzzed with a text from David. Mom, please call me. We need to talk. I set the phone aside without responding and took another sip of my cappuccino. The Italian trip I'd booked in my moment of defiance had turned into something much more significant. What was supposed to be a 2-week tour had become a 3-month adventure of self-discovery. After my family left that day in January, I'd spent exactly 1 week waiting for Thomas to make his choice. He'd called several times, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to angry to desperate. But he never came home, and he never gave me a clear answer about our marriage. On day 8, I'd called Patricia, my lawyer. I want to file for divorce, I'd told her. Are you sure, Margaret? That's a big step. I'm 67 years old, Patricia. I don't have time for small steps. The divorce proceedings had been surprisingly straightforward. Thomas had tried to claim half of everything, but Patricia had been thorough in documenting which assets were separate property. My inheritance, my retirement accounts, my house, all remained mine. Thomas left our 43-year marriage with his pension, his personal belongings, and exactly what he'd brought into it decades ago. He'd moved in with David and Rachel temporarily, which lasted exactly 3 weeks before they'd had enough of each other. Last I'd heard, he was renting a small apartment across town and working part-time at an accounting firm. The comfortable retirement I'd funded was over. David had attempted to return the $20,000 in installments, but after the first payment of $500, the payments had stopped. I'd hired a collection agency. Not because I needed the money, but because actions needed to have consequences. Rachel had tried a different approach. She'd shown up at my house in February with tears and apologies, claiming she'd been stressed and hadn't meant the things she'd said. When I'd politely but firmly maintained my boundaries, she'd accused me of breaking up her family. "You've turned David against his father," she'd sobbed. "You've destroyed everything." "I've done nothing but stop financing your lifestyle," I'd replied. If that destroyed everything, then there wasn't much there to begin with. By March, David had stopped calling altogether. I'd heard through neighbors that they'd lost their house. The mortgage I'd indirectly been subsidizing had finally caught up with them. They'd moved into a rental property in a less expensive neighborhood. Part of me had felt guilt about that. But a larger part felt relief that I was no longer responsible for cleaning up their financial messes. The Italian trip had been a revelation. For the first time in decades, I'd woken up each day thinking only about what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, what I wanted to see. No one else's schedule to accommodate, no one else's preferences to consider. I'd extended the trip twice, then found a small apartment in Siena for a month-long stay. The owner, Elena, was a widow about my age who spoke excellent English and had become an unexpected friend. "You are different from other American tourists," she'd told me one evening as we shared wine on her terrace. "You are not rushing to see everything. You are learning to live again." She was right. I was learning to live again, but more than that, I was learning who Margaret Thompson actually was when she wasn't defined by her relationships to other people. I'd taken cooking classes and learned to make fresh pasta. I'd spent hours in museums, lingering over art that spoke to me without anyone hurrying me along. I'd had long conversations with fellow travelers and locals, conversations that had nothing to do with family drama or domestic responsibilities. For the first time in my adult life, I'd been completely selfish with my time and attention. And it had been wonderful. Now, back in Florence for my final week in Italy, I was preparing to return home to a very different life than the one I'd left. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Thomas. "Margaret, David told me you're still in Italy. We really need to discuss some things. Please call me." I deleted the message without reading it fully. Elena had asked me why I didn't just stay in Italy permanently. "You have money, you have freedom. Why go back to people who do not appreciate you?" It was tempting. I could sell my house in America, buy something here, start completely over. But running away felt like letting them win. I had a life in America. Friends I'd neglected, interests I'd abandoned. I wanted to reclaim that life, not escape from it. Over breakfast, I made a list of things I wanted to do when I returned home. I wanted to reconnect with my old friend Susan, whom I'd lost touch with because Thomas had never liked her husband. I wanted to volunteer at the animal shelter, something I'd always meant to do but never had time for. I wanted to take art classes at the community college. I wanted to live the life I'd put on hold for 43 years while I was being the perfect wife and mother. My phone rang. David again. This time I answered. "Hello, David." "Mom." "Thank God. I've been trying to reach you for weeks. I've been busy. Mom, we need to talk. Things have been difficult since you left." "I didn't leave, David. I went on vacation. There's a difference. It's been 6 months. "Yes, it has been wonderful." There was a pause. "Mom, I think I owe you an apology." "You think?" "I know I do. We all do. What we did was wrong." I waited. In the old days, I would have rushed to make him feel better, to smooth over the discomfort. Now, I let him sit with it. "Rachel and I are getting divorced," he said finally. I felt a complicated mix of emotions, relief, sadness for him, and something that might have been vindication. "I'm sorry to hear that, David." "Are you?" "I'm sorry that your marriage failed. I'm not sorry that you're no longer with someone who encouraged you to treat me badly." She said you'd be happy about this. What I'm happy about is that you're calling me yourself instead of having her manage our conversation. Another pause. "Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking. About what you said, about how we treated you. You were right. About what specifically? About everything. The lying, the manipulation, the way we excluded you. It was cruel. Yes, it was. I want to make things right. What does that mean to you, David? I want us to have a relationship again. A real one. Not the fake, polite version we've had for the past few years." I looked out at the Florentine street, watching people hurry past with their morning routines, their everyday concerns. How simple life could be when you weren't constantly managing other people's emotions. David, I appreciate the apology, but I need you to understand something. I'm not the same person who left for Italy 6 months ago. What do you mean? I mean, I've learned to be happy without you, without any of you. And while I'd like to have a relationship with my son, I don't need one, not if it's going to cost me my peace of mind. Mom, let me finish. For 43 years, I organized my life around other people's needs. I made myself smaller so others could be bigger. I accepted crumbs of affection and called it love. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. I won't do that anymore, David. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be because you value me, not because you need something from me. I do value you, then prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Consistent, respectful actions over time. How do I do that? Start by taking responsibility for your choices instead of blaming Rachel for everything. She didn't force you to lie to me. She didn't make you exclude me from Christmas. Those were your decisions. Silence. She made it seem like including you would ruin everything, and you chose to believe her instead of talking to me directly. Yes, I did, and I'm sorry. It was the first time he'd taken full responsibility without deflecting blame. Thank you for saying that. Mom, when are you coming home? Next week. Can I see you when you get back? I thought about it. The old Margaret would have said yes immediately, eager to rebuild the relationship regardless of the cost. The new Margaret had different priorities. David, I'll be back next Thursday. If you'd like to have coffee with me the following Saturday, we can do that. But I need you to understand that I'm not coming back to the life I left. Things will be different. Different how? I'm going to be living for myself now. I'm going to pursue my own interests, maintain my own friendships, make my own decisions. If you want to be part of that life, you're welcome, but you won't be the center of it. After I hung up, I sat for a long time watching Florence wake up around me. In a few days, I'd be back in my empty house, starting over at 67. Some people might see that as sad or frightening. I saw it as liberation. Elena found me there an hour later, still nursing my cold cappuccino and smiling at nothing in particular. You look peaceful, she observed, sitting down across from me. I feel peaceful. Your son, he called. Yes, he wants to apologize, to rebuild our relationship. And you? What do you want? It was such a simple question, but it had taken me 67 years to learn how to answer it honestly. I want to go home and create a life that makes me happy. If my family wants to be part of that, they'll need to earn their place. But if they don't, I'll be just fine without them. Elena raised her espresso cup in a small toast. To women who learn to save themselves. I clinked my cup against hers, thinking about the text message that had started this whole journey. Rachel had been right about one thing. She'd gone to Spain with the ones who really mattered. She just hadn't understood that the person who mattered most was me. 3 weeks later, I was back in my house, but it felt like a completely different place. I'd rearranged the furniture, bought new artwork, planted flowers I loved instead of ones Thomas had preferred. I'd reconnected with old friends and made new ones in my art class. David and I had coffee that Saturday, and it went better than I'd expected. He was different too, humbler, more honest about his mistakes. We talked about the possibility of rebuilding trust, but we both understood it would take time. Thomas had asked to see me, but I'd declined. Our marriage was over, and I had no interest in rehashing old grievances or listening to new excuses. Rachel had tried calling once, but I'd let it go to voicemail. Her message was full of blame and self-pity. I deleted it without listening to the end. Some relationships I'd learned aren't worth saving. But sitting in my sunlit kitchen on a Tuesday morning, reading a book I'd chosen, drinking coffee I'd made exactly the way I liked it, planning a day that belonged entirely to me, I felt richer than I ever had when I was financing other people's dreams. They'd tried to make me disappear, to render me irrelevant in my own life. Instead, they'd set me free, and for that, despite everything, I was grateful.